Today is the day that I will be doing my first 2023 NFL mock draft. This video will not have any trades because it's just a little too early, in my opinion, to be starting to put trades in there. I know that brings a lot of the fun, but that will be in my mock draft 2.0, which will be after the combine. This is just a pre-combine, just to kind of have fun, and we'll have some fun combine stuff coming out for you guys too here in the next week. But first things first. The Chicago Bears have the #1 overall pick, and everybody knows they want to trade down. Everybody knows that. They're even trying to say they want to trade Justin Fields so that they can get as much as they can possibly get with that first overall pick. Now, it has come out that Justin Fields is likely to stay in Chicago, and I would assume that because I don't think really any of the quarterbacks in this draft are head and shoulders above Justin Fields. Now, next year, I think it makes a lot more sense to maybe go up and get a quarterback if you're Chicago. So if I'm Chicago, I'm staying put with Justin Fields, not with the #1 overall pick. I do want to trade down here, but like I said before, this is a no trades mock draft. And this will be done on the PFF mock draft simulator. It's not my favorite per se, but I do think it's one of the more used ones, so I'm going to go ahead and use that for 1.0 at least. But let's get right into it and see what is going to go down here on my mock draft 1.0. Now, first of all, the Chicago Bears are on the clock at 1. And like I said before, I'm not going to go quarterback here because I do believe in Justin Fields. And even if he plays terrible, we still technically have a full season next year to get him some weapons, get him some offensive line help, help him figure it out. And worst case scenario, he sucks. You guys get the first overall pick next year again, and then you get Caleb Williams or Drake May or really any of those guys. So with that being said, I think this is a pretty obvious choice in my opinion. There's one person or position really that I would look at other than what I'm about to pick, and that's offensive tackle. The only reason I don't go offensive tackle here is because with the #1 overall pick, I just don't see the clear-cut #1 offensive tackle in this draft. I see more of a top 3, top 4 type situation, and no real #1. So I'm not going to use a #1 overall selection on that. But if I were to trade down, then we could talk about that. But like I said, this is no trade. So with that being said, Jalen Carter's off my board with all the stuff that's going on right now. Will Anderson Jr. is the selection if I am Chicago. You get the best edge player probably in the last 3 drafts, realistically. I know it seems like his hype has really, really fallen in the last maybe 4 months or 6 months or so. But I do think Will Anderson still is the best edge in this draft. I think he's better than any edge in last year's draft. And I'm a huge Aiden Hutchinson fan. As you can see, lines on the hat, you know what it is. But Will Anderson is just a beast. And I think he steps in and pretty much takes Khalil Mack's spot that he had 2 seasons ago, and the Chicago Bears add to the defense that really needs the help. Now, the Houston Texans, this is, in my opinion, where the draft really gets fun. I think outside of a trade down scenario for the Bears, it's Will Anderson, really no question. Jalen Carter could be the pick, but we know he had some issues today, actually, a few hours ago that came out saying he is actually going to court or whatever you want to say. He has a warrant out for his arrest, basically. He was arrested for reckless driving and speeding and racing and some other stuff that actually ended up in one of his teammates' death. So, unfortunately, Jalen Carter, I think, really falls down my board right now just based on that. But again, this is my mock draft 1.0, so don't take this as what's going to happen at the end of the day when the draft actually rolls around. Now, let's get into the Houston Texans because they are one of the teams that I think have the most options here because I think it's obvious they need a quarterback. That's the #1 need in my opinion. If I'm Houston, quarterback's probably the pick. You could go defensive line with Jalen Carter, but like I just explained, Jalen Carter's likely not even on the board for me at 2. So we will see him fall based on what is going on in his, off the field stuff, which was a concern coming into this. So keep that in mind. Now, with the Houston Texans, I think quarterback is the obvious selection, right? We've got Bryce Young, who's got some, size concerns, some injury concerns with his size. I'm not too concerned about that, but that is a concern. Now, Will Levis is a guy who's, 6'4", I believe 230, 235. He's got a big arm. He can move, but he's got, some issues. He's got some Zach Wilson in him. Now, do I think Will Levis will be Zach Wilson? Probably not. I think he'll be a little bit better as an NFL player, but he does have the same kind of issues. Some processing issues, some issues, how do I say it? Not like understanding the offense. I don't think that's necessarily his problem, which I will say Will Levis also is one of the most hit quarterbacks I've ever seen on film. That dude's getting smacked every single play, it seems like. But with that being said, Will Levis, I don't take him at 2 because I just think the upside is pretty good, but the downside is a little too risky for me at number 2. CJ Stroud, okay? I believe he is the safest pick at quarterback in the class. Period. No questions about it. No question. He is the safest quarterback pick. With that being said, I think his absolute ceiling is a guy like Dak Prescott. Not in the way that Dak Prescott plays necessarily, but a guy that's like, he's always right outside of that top 6 or 7. Like, he'll always be 8 through 15, I think. CJ Stroud reminds me of a guy that he doesn't have really any elite traits or talents, in my opinion. He's got a pretty good arm. He's pretty accurate. He's pretty smart. Obviously, I don't know the guy outside of some film and watching the games, but based on what I've seen, I think his floor is the highest in the class, but his ceiling's lower than a lot of guys. I have him as my QB3, I think, just because I do have one guy in this class that's upside is nuclear. And that would be Anthony Richardson, and he is the 11th ranked prospect on the board here. No, I'm not going Anthony Richardson at 2. I'm not doing that because there's too many question marks with him, and I do love the elite talent, but I do think I have one QB ahead of him right now, and that is Mr. Bryce Young, and that is who is going to get picked by Houston. Bryce Young, quarterback from Alabama, just because I feel like he is the best quarterback in the class. He offers you similar upside to Anthony Richardson. Now, I know Anthony Richardson's upside is astronomical, but he offers you that same upside of could be elite, but he has a higher floor, I think, because his questions aren't processing, they're not accuracy, they're not arm issues, they're not mechanics issues. I mean, he has some of that, but not as much as Anthony Richardson. His is more just size concerns, injury concerns, and like I said before, that doesn't bother me too much because he, I believe, checked in about 5'11" and about 200 pounds, so they're hopefully getting him up to like 215, 220-ish. That would be great. But Bryce Young's the pick for Houston. I think he is their quarterback for the future, and I think they've got a pretty good quarterback room now with him and Davis Webb. So Davis Webb, great backup, not a starter in my opinion, and Bryce Young is the pick. Now, this is where it gets a lot of fun because Arizona is in such a weird position right now. I feel like they don't know what they want to do, and I certainly don't know what they want to do. This pick right here would be Jalen Carter all day long, no question about it. But like we said before, Jalen Carter has some off-field concerns. So what does Arizona do at 3? Do they say, let's just take Jalen Carter no matter what? The off-field concerns don't concern us too much. Do they take a corner? I mean, I don't see that happening at 3. I don't think there's a corner in this class necessarily worth the 3rd overall selection. And if there is, it's Christian Gonzalez, but I want to see his combine numbers first because I really do like him, but those numbers could push him up. Do they go Tyree Wilson, another really good edge at 3? That could make some sense. I feel they do need edge. They do need D lineman in general, and he could play kind of the 3-4, 3-5-7 tech that can kind of slide around and do a little bit of everything. Or do they go wide receiver? Because realistically, I think DeAndre Hopkins is gone. I think everybody thinks that. Everybody pretty much knows that by now, that DeAndre Hopkins is getting traded. With the 3rd overall pick, you don't really want to go wide receiver unless it's a guy you think could be legit the best receiver in the NFL at some point. And is Quentin Johnston that? I'm not sure. I'm really not 100% sure. I wish it had his height and weight here. I do believe he's like 6'4", 215, 220. Or actually, I think he's probably like 220, 230. But with that being said, they also need offensive line help. And at this moment right now, I do think offensive line help is probably the best bet for Arizona. But again, at 3, there's not one obvious selection here. So with that being said, they need defensive help. They need defensive linemen. I'm going to go with Tyree Wilson because I do really like Tyree Wilson. I think, like I said, he's a guy that can play all over the defensive line. He's a guy that would come in and start day one and be probably the best D lineman on that entire team. Offensive line help obviously is a big thing, but I just don't see it here. I feel like the Cardinals would go Tyree and pass on Jalen Carter based on the off-field issues. Now, like I said before, don't go screaming in the comments like, what kind of idiot passes on Jalen Carter for Tyree Wilson, da-da-da-da-da. We don't know what's happening right now. I mean, legitimately, Jalen Carter could end up going to jail for a full year. 12 months, he could end up in jail. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not, but we never know. So I'm going to go about it as if he's going to go to jail. Or not if he's going to go to jail, but if there's a pretty big possibility that he does that. Now, at number 4, the Indianapolis Colts right now are in a really weird spot, I think. They really desperately need a quarterback. Now, the question is, which quarterback do they take? Do they go Will Levis for the upside? Kind of not punting year one, but kind of going, okay, year one, we're not going to be great, but we have a quarterback now for the future. Or do they take my high floor, low upside prospect in CJ Stroud? Or do they go nuclear and go Anthony Richardson and just say, we're punting year one. We're going to sign a guy like Jacoby Brissett to start for us this season, and we'll have Anthony Richardson start for the future. If I'm the Colts, we need to win next year. We have a team that's good enough. Offensive line needs a little bit of help, but it's a good offensive line. We could draft another receiver or sign another receiver. Our running back's a friggin' stud, but he's 25 now. It's a possibility you might look to trade Jonathan Taylor if your team doesn't get off to the right start this year. So with that being said, I think they take CJ Stroud, the quarterback from Ohio State, because he can step in and start number 1 right away, be the quarterback of the future as well. Now, is it a bad pick to take a guy like Dak Prescott, who's going to be the 8th best quarterback at best at number 4? No, not in a class like this where there's no clear-cut superstar quarterbacks. Every quarterback that is in this class has some question marks. A lot of them have good upside, but I think the Colts would go with the safe option here after having to deal with the likes of Carson Wentz and Matt Ryan the last 2 seasons. With that being said, the Seattle Seahawks are now on the clock with the 5th overall selection. This right here is the biggest question mark for me. Because at this moment, I don't think I can let Jalen Carter slide anymore because he's that good. Like, realistically, he is that good. And the Seattle Seahawks really need some help up front. Also, there are some rumors that Geno Smith might not be coming back to Seattle next year. So do they look quarterback here? Because a guy like Will Levis is available. And he's a guy that could start year 1 and then just get better and better. I think I'm in the camp that Geno Smith stays in Seattle. So with that being said, we're not going to go QB because worst case scenario, Seattle ends up sucking really bad this year. And just like I talked about with Chicago at the beginning of this, ends up getting a guy like Drake May or Caleb Williams next season. So with that being said, I do think we're going to take Jalen Carter here at number 5. Just because of the fact that he's so good, I don't think he would slide past 5. But I don't know if one of the top 3 teams would want to take that pick. But Seattle, they really, really need defensive tackles specifically. And I think Seattle's the type of team to take a swing on a guy because of the fact that they know what kind of talent he has. Even if he does get in trouble, they'll probably still have him, the following season. And the Seattle Seahawks aren't a very good team as it is now. So now my team, the Detroit Lions, are on the clock with the 6th overall selection. And you Lions fans are not going to like this pick because as of right now, I have a guy that I'm going to pick here. I was pretty much going to pick him the whole time. And it's going to be quarterback Anthony Richardson. I'm going to pick Anthony Richardson to the Detroit Lions at the 6th overall pick. And here is why, okay? Anthony Richardson has the chance to be a legitimately nuclear option at the quarterback position. We're talking Pat Mahomes, we're talking Josh Allen, we're talking, Jalen Hurts even, he could be on that level now. 6'5", 240, 4.4 speed, if not 4.3 speed. I'm being a little nice here. Or actually, I guess I'm being a little rude by saying he's a little slower than he might actually be. But he's got an absolute cannon. He has some issues with accuracy, but those are mechanical. I think Anthony Richardson, with the right coaching staff, with the right team, the right offensive line and weapons around him, think about it. The Lions' offensive line is one of the best in the NFL. The Lions' weapons, some of the best in the NFL. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams. Obviously, we need some more help at tight end and depth receiver. We could draft another running back this season, but that'll be a little bit later in the draft. But imagine next season, Jared Goff's the starter all season. Anthony Richardson comes in and runs, some wildcat because he's a quarterback, with the option to throw, but it's a called run. Then the season after that, Anthony Richardson could actually be in competition for a starting spot. And my point here is, if Anthony Richardson hits, the Lions are one of the best teams in the NFL for the next 10 years, period. No questions, as long as he's healthy. I mean, imagine Anthony Richardson, in my opinion, is Lamar Jackson with a bigger arm. What are you waiting on? I mean, if I told Lions fans I could trade the number 6 overall pick for Lamar Jackson straight up, most Lions fans would do that. Anthony Richardson at 6, though, sounds insane to some people for some reason. He is Lamar Jackson with a bigger arm. Like, let's be real with ourselves right now. His issues are mechanical. Same thing Lamar had coming out of college. I feel like Lamar had a little bit more hate, though, because Lamar almost, I feel like, started this whole, I wouldn't say started, but he became like the catalyst for more teams to be like, okay, mobile quarterbacks can work out, And long story short, Anthony Richardson, in my opinion, to Detroit, no-brainer at 6. I don't think he falls past 7, 8, 9. I think one of those teams take him. So if you're Detroit, you go ahead and take your guy now, because then with pick 18, a little bit later, we can take defense and we can help the team out next season specifically. But even this pick helps the team out next season because you can put him back there, run some read options, run some triple options. And then guess what? If Jared Goff sucks like he did 2 seasons ago, or even at the beginning of last season, bench him. You got Anthony Richardson waiting in the wings. You're good to go. And if worst case scenario, you got a great backup for 1 season and then a franchise starter the next fucking 10 years. So with that being said, the Las Vegas Raiders are now on the clock. And like I said with the Lions, or not the Lions, like I said with the Colts, they're in a weird spot. They're an sort of aging team that needs a quarterback that can start next season. But realistically, there's only 1 QB left. Now, what I think happens in Las Vegas is they sign a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr, something like that. I don't even think Derek Carr's met with them or anything, but something along those lines. Jacoby Brissett, something like that. I feel like Jimmy Garoppolo and Jacoby Brissett make the most sense because of the fact that they used to play in New England with the head coach here in Las Vegas. Now, the thing is, do they go young QB to sit in the wings and sit behind Jimmy G to play next season? Maybe. I could definitely see that. Or do they go defense to help their team next year? Because, I mean, if they ain't got nobody on defense, it's not going to make a difference who they have at quarterback, realistically. A guy like Jimmy G, if that's who you're going to go with, or a guy like Jacoby Brissett, if that's who you're going to go with, if they're not, trading for Aaron Rodgers, which they basically said they're not going to. If they're not going to make that happen, I think you wait a year or 2 more, because Jimmy G could come in and start for you for 2 seasons, be a really good QB, and then you can figure it out then. I don't love Will Levis personally, but I could see him going here at 7. I think that could make a lot of sense. But with that being said, I think the Las Vegas Raiders would end up going corner at this point. And I do like Devin Witherspoon and I do like Christian Gonzalez, but right now I think Christian Gonzalez fits the Raiders a little bit better than Devin, because he's got prototype size, speed, length, all that. So he can do a little bit of everything. He's like 6'2", 210, 215, probably going to run a 4.4, 4.3 even maybe. I've heard a lot of stuff about his speed being legit. So at 7, I have the Raiders taking a corner in my first mock draft of the year. Now, this is where Will Levis really comes into play at number 8 because realistically, Desmond Ridder, who knows? He could be the guy. He could be just the starter next year for 4 games, and then Will Levis takes over because he's not the guy. What I think's going to happen is the Falcons believe in Desmond Ridder. I think they believe in Desmond Ridder. So I think, personally, they're not going to go quarterback right here. I think what would happen is they would look to the defensive side of the ball, or even receiver, because I know they just went receiver at 8 last year, but they could always use some more help. With that being said, so right now, I believe the Falcons believe in Desmond Ridder, so I'm going to try to get him some help. And now, a lot of you guys will hear that and think I'm going to draft Quentin Johnston, the receiver out of TCU. No, I'm not looking for receiver because I think Atlanta's the type of team that will likely go sign a receiver in free agency this year, somebody like a DJ Chark or, one of those middle, like 25 to 27-year-old receivers, so they're still pretty young. But I think they're going to go offensive line here because Caleb McGarry is likely to walk in free agency. And Paris Johnson or Pete Skoronski could be great for them. And the question here is, the thing about it is, I do believe, I think Pete is a little bit better currently, but then again, Paris Johnson's a beast too. We're going to go with Pete Skoronski here to the Atlanta Falcons. I just think that makes the most sense. I think they're looking for a right tackle. I think he's going to be a beast in the run game. He's going to be a beast in the pass game. I think he's just if I had to pick tackle one, it would probably be Pete. But again, that's one of those things that it's hard to really gauge because I think it depends on what scheme you're going to run. I think a lot of that, depends on what coaching staff you have and what position exactly you're looking for, whether it be right or left tackle. But the Carolina Panthers are now on the clock at number 9 overall, and quarterback is the obvious, clear-cut number 1 need here. And I do think Will Levis makes a lot of sense for Carolina because he's got the upside. They've got a guy in Sam Darnold who started last year, who could start next year for him, who actually they have been in talks lately with. And I think they do have a chance at a guy like Derek Carr, somebody like Jimmy Garoppolo even maybe. But even then, you're kind of like, okay, we still need a QB. I think Carolina would take Will Levis at 9 overall because he's the last quarterback left worth that, first round, top 15, top 20 selection. I think the Panthers are good enough as a team. They won't be picking in the top 5 next season. So I think now's the time to get your quarterback. And I think Will Levis offers them something that, a guy like Derek Carr or Jimmy G won't offer, which is youth and big play potential. And I think with a guy like DJ Moore and the good offensive line they have there with the solid defense, give him a year of Derek Carr or Jimmy G or, Jacoby Brissett, one of these, Teddy Bridgewater, one of those type of guys. Teddy Bridgewater, not so much anymore, but Jacoby Brissett would make a lot of sense here. Just a guy that can start next year for him, and then Will Levis will come in later on. But I do think this makes a lot of sense, and I think the Carolina Panthers would do that draft pick there. So now, the Philadelphia Eagles are on the clock with their first-round selection at 10th overall. The Eagles are one of the harder teams, I think, because they could go corner, they could go offensive line. So I do think corner makes the most sense for Philadelphia as of right now because James Bradbury is likely to walk. Darius Slay is getting a little older. So I think Devin Witherspoon here just makes so much sense. I think he's a great scrappy corner. I know he doesn't have the great size, speed, length that I was talking about earlier with Christian Gonzalez, which is why Christian went a little higher. But I think Devin's a little scrappier. He's a little more, he's a little tougher kind of guy. He'll do whatever you ask him pretty much. I think he's a really good player. And I think he fits perfectly in Philadelphia right now. And he really will help that defense out next year. Now, pick 11. This is a weird selection because we did just see them cut their starting left tackle. So with that being said, I think it's almost like 100% obvious what position they're going to go with. I could see them going with maybe Quentin Johnston, but I just don't see them taking a receiver this early. Personally, I don't see that. I think I think Paris Johnson makes the most sense here for Tennessee because they do need a tackle. They need offensive line help in general. But cutting Taylor Lewan, and I don't know what's going to happen there. There is some, thoughts that he could come back at a lower rate, which would make a lot of sense, I think. But I just think tackle makes the most sense for them, and Paris Johnson's a great player that'll start day one for them. So at pick 12, the Houston Texans are now on the clock, and this one, in my opinion, is almost a no-brainer. You just took your quarterback. Why not get you a receiver to go with him? They don't really have a wide receiver one right now, with Brandon Cooks likely on the move. I could see them signing somebody in free agency, but right now I don't see a legit wide receiver one in free agency, at least that they'd want to go after, because they're trading Brandon Cooks because he's aging and expensive. Why go get another aging, expensive guy in free agency? I think Quentin Johnson makes the most sense. You're not reaching on him at 12. I think, if anything, that's great value for a guy like that. This is not the greatest receiver class, though, so I'm not taking these receivers super early. I'm not going to take any of these guys in the top 10, probably. I could see it, though, definitely happening, but I just think this makes the most sense as of right now. And then Quentin Johnson is going to start day one, wide receiver one. He's a beast, 6'4", 230, I think, 220. I'm sure he's going to run great at the combine, and you need to get Bryce Young some damn weapons. He's already got a pretty decent O-line. It's not the greatest, but he's got some help at tackle. And the interior O-line's not terrible, not great either. But Quentin Johnson, pick at 12. Pick 13, the New York Jets. They do need a quarterback, but I think they're going to end up with one of the big-name guys, Aaron Rodgers or Derek Carr. Most likely Aaron Rodgers. So with that being said, it's kind of tough to decide who they're going to go with. There's a lot left still in a lot of different positions. And here I do think offensive line, specifically offensive tackle, would make a lot of sense. Broderick Jones might be a little bit of a reach here at 13, but I do think, other than quarterback, tackle is their biggest missing piece right now. And I think Broderick Jones could and would be worth the pick. So I'm going to go with Broderick Jones here at 13 for the Jets. I just think, regardless of who you have at quarterback, you need to have a good offensive line. And if you're going to go get a guy like Aaron Rodgers, having another starting tackle would be a good idea, especially because they don't really have one right now. They have George Fant, who is all right, but he's older and he hasn't really been the best player. So Broderick Jones at 13 to the Jets. And now the Patriots are now on the clock. And there are a few players that I'm thinking of right off the top of my head. Brian Branch, Lucas Van Ness, Jordan Addison, Myles Murphy, Joey Porter could make some sense. But the big thing right now in New England, I think the big missing piece on the offensive side of the ball is a receiver. I don't think they have a legit receiver one that is like, yes, he is our guy. Mac Jones, you know what to do. He's going to make plays. And I think there's two guys that could make a lot of sense here for the Patriots, and two guys that I think could be worth the selection: Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison. Now, the question here is, which one is the better fit for New England? I personally believe Zay Flowers is going to be the better receiver. Even though he's a little bit smaller, I think he's just got a little bit more of that wide receiver one upside than a Jordan Addison. I do like a Jordan Addison, but I think Zay Flowers just makes so much sense in New England, especially because they already have a few big body guys. I think Zay Flowers flying up and down that field with Tyquan Thornton as well, who could be pretty good in his sophomore season. I think that would be perfect. Now at 15, the Green Bay Packers are on the clock, and they have a lot of holes right now. The number one hole, in my opinion, is going to be quarterback. Now, Aaron Rodgers is likely on the move. Even if he's not traded, he's likely to retire. I do not see him starting another game in Green Bay. However, I do think they are still going to run it with Jordan Love. So I don't see them taking a quarterback here. There's really not a quarterback worth taking here anyway. So where do they go now? I think for the Green Bay Packers, receiver or linebacker, maybe even edge, could make some sense. And you know what? I think based on the way that the Packers have drafted recently, they're not going to go receiver, even though they should. It'd be hilarious if they did, though, now that they're getting rid of Aaron Rodgers. What I think the right pick would be, I think they kind of have to go D-line. If they're not going to go receiver at this point, I just feel like it makes the most sense. I do like Lucas Van Ness. I think he's a solid player. But a guy like Brian Brisset, I think, is just a little bit better. And I think he might fit a little bit better. So we're going to go Brian Brisset here at 15 to the Green Bay Packers. Help solidify that defensive line a little bit. Help Kenny Clark out. And just, their defense will be a little bit better now with Brian Brisset in the middle. So at 16, the Washington Commanders are on the clock. Obviously, they need a quarterback. There ain't none. Offensive line could make some sense. I think offensive line or corner makes the most sense right now for Washington. And I do think corner's probably the better position as of right now. So I think we're going to go with a corner. And it's really Joey Porter or Deontay Banks, but I think I have to go with Joey Porter. He's 6'2", 215, and he's got like 36, 37-inch arms, which is freaking ridiculous for a guy that size. That's like what you're looking for in a 6'5" offensive lineman. Obviously, he has some issues, but he should run pretty well at the combine. So Joey Porter is the pick at 16 to the Washington Commanders. And I just personally think Joey Porter could be the best corner in the draft in terms of upside, but he has a lot of downside, so there's a lot of give with that selection. But I do like the pick. I think he will be the starting corner, one of the starting corners week 1 next year for them. So I think it helps their team more than really anywhere else that they could have went. Now, the Steelers are kind of in the same boat as Washington. They don't need a quarterback really as much, but they still kind of do. Offensive line could be a good pick for them. This one's really tough because, honestly, offensive line and corner are like neck and neck in terms of needs for the Steelers. But it's tough because there's a lot of good corners. There's a lot of good O-linemen. But as of right now, I think corner's starting to thin out a lot quicker. And with the Lions coming up at 18, knowing they're going to take a corner really makes me want to go corner here. There is a lot of corners left, but there's a decent amount of offensive linemen too. So what I'm going to do is we are going to take Deontay Banks, the corner from Maryland, most likely. I just think that makes a lot of sense for the Steelers. It gets them another starting corner. They get a little bit younger at the position. He is also 6'2", 210, I think, 215. A lot like Joey Porter, but I think Joey Porter offers a little bit more upside. But the Detroit Lions are on the clock. We went Anthony Richardson, the first selection. As of right now, there's not really a corner on the docket here that makes me want to take him. I do think a guy like Tyreek Stevenson could be a solid selection here. I think Brian Branch could be a possibility because he's a guy that could play slot for us and a little bit of safety as well. Guys like Lucas Van Ness, Myles Murphy could make some sense. Andre Carter could make some sense. This one's really tough because there's a lot of different ways that we could go. Even Bijan Robinson could make some sense. But Osiris Torrance wouldn't be bad. But I do think with the fact that the Lions absolutely need corners, no questions asked, like we have to take a corner at some point. I think what we're going to do is we're going to maybe reach on a guy like Tyreek Stevenson because he's a really good player, I think. Another guy that's 6'1", 6'2", got really good speed. I think it might be a little bit of a reach, but we're going on a run of corners right now. So the Lions will draft Tyreek Stevenson with the 18th overall selection out of Miami. And I know a lot of you guys aren't going to like this draft that I'm putting together right now, but I feel pretty good about it as a Lions fan. I really like Tyreek and I really like AR. So I feel confident about this draft. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are now on the clock. They have a lot of needs. And now the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are one of the biggest rebuilding teams, I think, right now because they're pretty much tearing everything down. They built a team around Tom Brady that's a little older. They got a lot of holes now, but I do think offensive line is their biggest position of need. A guy like Lucas Van Ness could make a lot of sense, but I think they're going to take a tackle here, just because that's a position that generally you will reach a little bit on, and I think the guy that they take is Dwan Jones, mainly because of the fact that like they need a left tackle. We're gonna go with Dwan Jones here. They need a tackle desperately. I think he offers a bit more upside than Anton, so he's got freakish size, and if he does pretty well at the combine, I think he could go as high as 19. Now the Seattle Seahawks are on the clock, and they took a flyer at this point with Jalen Carter, with their 5th overall selection. Now with their 20th overall pick, they really need offensive line help, specifically on the interior. So I think they're going to go with Osiris Torrance here. Yeah, I think there's a pretty good chance they take Osiris here. I think that makes a lot of sense for them. They clearly need interior offensive line. Their tackles are pretty good and set now. But interior offensive line, they need a lot of help. And what better than Osiris Torrance, who's probably the best guard in the class, best interior offensive lineman in the class. And then at pick 21, the LA Chargers are on the clock. And they have a lot of needs. They need offensive line, they need receiver, they need a lot. So, and although the Chargers listed at wide receiver as their first need, I don't know why I said that like that, but their wide receiver is listed as their number one need. And I just don't agree with that at all. I think defensive line realistically is their biggest need. And with that being said, I think Lucas Van Ness is the clear-cut choice here for them. He fits their scheme well. He fits what they need perfectly. So Lucas Van Ness to the Chargers at pick 21 makes a lot of sense to me. And then we have the Baltimore Ravens up here. They need wide receiver clearly. They need some defensive help. But I do think right now receiver's probably your best value. Bijan Robinson could make a lot of sense for them. What I think is going to happen is the Baltimore Ravens are going to end up taking a receiver, likely Jordan Addison. I think that's going to end up being the selection here. Just because they do need other positions, but I think receivers their number one need clearly. They could definitely use defensive line though, and Myles Murphy would make a lot of sense for them. And then they could wait till the second round. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Myles Murphy here to the Baltimore Ravens. I just think that makes a lot of sense. I was going to go receiver, but the receiver upside in this draft isn't that high, and I think they're really looking for a wide receiver 1. So if anything, they'll probably go trade for DeAndre Hopkins. But Myles Murphy to the Baltimore Ravens, perfect fit, I think. And then we have the Minnesota Vikings here. This right here is kind of a tricky situation because a guy like Bijan Robinson is still sitting on the board here at 23rd pick overall. And I do think that they would make a lot of sense for a running back like Bijan because a guy like Dalvin Cook's getting older. They did take him in the second round a few years ago. But I don't think they're going to go with Bijan here. No, this is kind of a weird selection because they are kind of that weird team. They need a corner. They need defensive help in general. So I'm gonna give them Brian Branch. I think Brian Branch makes a lot of sense. They need a safety. They need a corner. He's a little bit of both. You can probably play either or, but I think he just makes a lot of sense for them. Now, Jacksonville at 24. This is a tough one because they do have a lot of needs. But offensive line is really their number one need, but there's not a lot left at offensive line right now. I think offensive line is pretty much what you gotta go with here. I could see defensive line though. A guy like Andre Carter could make some sense. Nolan Smith could make some sense. But man, I do think they played really well defensively last year. But I do think offensive line could have been their biggest issue. I think I'm going to take Anton Harrison here for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I don't love this selection, but I do think he could play guard. He could play either tackle. So it makes some sense. And I do think if they were to take defensive line, you'd be adding to a side of your team that was already really good last year, whereas your offensive line wasn't the greatest. But at 25, okay. This is where I think Bijan Robinson goes. Because at 25, right, the New York Giants likely are going to let Saquon Barkley walk in free agency. It's either that or a franchise tag, and they have not franchise tagged him yet. Now, the only other problem with that is they desperately need wide receivers. But if you go receiver, that means the Cowboys could get Bijan. But if you go Bijan, then you're not going to get a receiver, obviously. But in my opinion, I think the Giants will let Saquon walk, and they will draft his replacement with the 25th overall pick in Bijan Robinson. And honestly, I think that's a lot. That's pretty low for Bijan. I do think he will end up going higher, but because of no trades and all that, this is how it's going to go for mock draft 1.0. Now, the 26th overall pick, the Dallas Cowboys are on the clock, and they need some pieces. I think they could take a D lineman, they could take a corner, they could take an edge player. But with that being said, I think they're going to take Andre Carter. I do think he's the best edge available. He does have some question marks with, the whole Army thing. He might not be able to play, but based on talent alone, we're going to take Andre Carter here at 26 because I think he's a beast, and I think the Dallas Cowboys would agree with me. Now, at 27, the Bills on the clock, they have a lot of holes as well for a team that was so good last year. This is where I could see a guy like Michael Mayer going, a guy like Dalton Kincaid. This one's really tough because I do think there is a clear player that I want to take here, which is Nolan Smith. But I don't know if they'd want to go with their defensive side of the ball either. But let's go with Nolan Smith here to the Buffalo Bills at 27. And then at 28, the Cincinnati Bengals are on the clock, and they still clearly need offensive line help, but there's really nothing left at this point. I think they could use defense for sure. And you know what? I think we're still going to go O-line. There was a guard here that I think could be pretty good, Steve Avila, for them, and I'm going to take him here at 28 because offensive line is clearly their number one need. Has been and seems like it always will be. But that makes a lot of sense. Get a starting guard, and you're good to go. Now, the New Orleans Saints are on the clock here at 29. And let's see. They didn't have a pick at all yet in this draft. They need quarterback. They need corners. They need a lot of help. I think with a team like New Orleans, you just kind of got to take the best player available here because they do have so many holes. I think edge would be the pick here based on what they have and what will likely walk in free agency. And I do like Will McDonald here. Mozzie Smith could be solid. BJ Ojulari would be good. This is really tough, but I think I'm going to go with Will McDonald here at 29 with the fact that they're going to let Marcus Davenport walk in free agency, most likely. I think edge makes a lot of sense for them. They're in kind of a rebuild. They're one of the weirder teams in the NFL right now because they have so many issues and so many holes, but no money really to do anything and no picks to do anything. I do think that Will McDonald makes a lot of sense there. Now at 30, we have the Philadelphia Eagles up again, and they went ahead and selected Devin Witherspoon at the 10th overall pick. Now they need some help on the defensive side of the ball still. I think linebacker or D-line makes a lot of sense here. I think Ojulari could be good. Dayan Henley could be good. This one's tough because they really do have... I think I'm going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs here, and here's why. Miles Sanders last year was very good. The past 4 years, not too good. I think Jahmyr Gibbs in that offense is going to be like the Alvin Kamara of the Saints offense. So I think this makes a lot of sense. I think with the fact that they get 2 first-round picks, they can take a running back with one of those, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, the Kansas City Chiefs, your Super Bowl winners, are on the clock at 31. Where do they go? I think they could go either side of the ball at this point. They could go receiver, but I don't think they will. However, that would actually probably be the best pick for them. I think they're going to go with Antonio Johnson, and here's why. Because Justin Reed, I've heard, is likely going to be a cap casualty because they just need, some more help. And I think that Antonio Johnson is the second best safety in this class pretty easily. So I think Antonio Johnson to the Kansas City Chiefs makes a lot of sense. You guys might hate this mock draft. I kind of have the feeling you will because there's a lot going on here. But this is just mock draft number 1. There's going to probably be 4 more of these coming before the draft happens. So take all this with a grain of salt. But this is all for fun, really, anyway. We're just getting to play around as if I'm all the GMs of the NFL teams. No trades, of course. So, stuff just kind of went as it went. But with that being said, if you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe so you guys do not miss any other uploads. And we'll see you on the next one. Peace.